Since the last call, we've had movement with the draft legislation, as everyone's probably aware. It's waiting for its second reading in the House of Lords on Monday, and it's very uncertain at the minute when it will get royal assent. But even if we're working towards that happening, say the end of next week, it obviously does mean that the formal licence process can't go live, and under the concessions that gives us in terms of the reduced public consultation, we wouldn't be able to determine or grant licences. We're looking at past mid-July at the minute in terms of the formal licence process. But as you know from our previous Zooms, Manchester have been trying to get ahead on this, and we have already gone live with our streamlined temporary tables and chairs application process. So that form, hopefully everybody has seen, is available on the web at the minute. Clearly this is to assist premises that need outside seating to remain viable. And we are trying to assist premises wherever possible, as we've said before. But based on location, there may absolutely be some times where that is just not logistically, practically possible, but we will look at what alternatives we can provide around the city. And we have already been working with venues on an informal basis, again, because this legislation has been lagging, and it's behind the reopening of the sector. A number of venues will be aware, because we've been in touch with them last Friday, that we have assessed several proposals, I think around 20 odd proposals so far, and that affects over 70 licensed premises in the city, and we've been able to make some provision for outside seating for over 70 premises, either an extension to existing or new outside seating that will be agreed in principle. Obviously, what we're doing is we're going to take the line that we're not going to enforce the fact that the legislation isn't available for this to be properly licensed yet. We want to, we've had a clear directive from members to support this sector reopening, despite, I guess, the government lagging behind. So we're doing and we're working through that as quickly and as best we can. I think it's just to take a moment to explain that in doing that clearly, there's a lot of considerations around wider public safety, highways issues to take into account. And so it has precipitated 13 emergency road closures for safety reasons, to enable, obviously, where we've got tight clusters of premises and we don't know what customer behaviour is going to be like yet, queuing attendance and the risk of a lack of social distancing. Those emergency measures are going in this week, but that's going to have ramifications, obviously, on the way the city moves and works, and vehicular traffic as well as pedestrian traffic. So our ask back to all operators is just to continue to bear with us whilst we work through this as quickly as we can, because it's not easy stuff. It is pretty complex, and we're trying to facilitate and support people as much as possible. So those are going in for Saturday, and as I said, we've got a number of schemes that where venues have approached us that we're assisting with for Saturday. We'll continue next week to work through all the other proposals that we have got in and we are getting in daily. In terms of the applications online for the actual formal temporary licence, clearly they'll just be on hold. We won't be able to start processing those until the legislation goes live. But what we intend to do is start engaging with premises where we can, just to look at those applications and look at the viability of it and have those early conversations, because some of them, it might just be, it's really not possible, but let's look at what we can do. we have today finalised what the conditions will be that will be attached to those temporary tables and chairs licenses. So they will go live on the web today, if not today, tomorrow, so people can see, and that will answer a lot of the questions around what will we be required in terms of furniture and glass and all the rest of it. A letter went out yesterday via email to all licensed premises that we have emails for. We're conscious that our data in that regard might not be fully up to date, so we're also trying to send that as a link around all our various groups and business bulletin, and obviously CityCo and social media pages. We'll make sure that there's a link on there and everyone can see that letter. We've had a lot of input to that, but it has been something that we've agreed with our counterparts at a GM level, just to try and make sure that we had a consistent message and approach across the whole of GM for all premises, and also from how we're going to approach it from an enforcement point of view. I think a lot of questions are also answered within that, because there's all the relevant references and links that you need to posters, government guidance. There's a checklist at the back of that, clear information about what's required around fire risk assessments and all the rest of it. I guess the key headline is for premises to use the government guidance to complete your own COVID risk assessment in the first instance, and document that. And then we will obviously have council officers. It will probably be the licensing out of hours team in the first instance, who will be a point of contact to help interpret some of that and assist on the ground with any further advice around your procedures that you intend to put in place to mitigate those risks. We're all feeling our way through this. Some of the guidance isn't particularly clear either. If you look at the requirement that stipulates you should take contact details, for example, and then doesn't really give any further information, and goes on to say that we'll work with relevant departments to put a system in place. And we know the ICO has sort of raised concerns about that. So, sorry, the Information Commissioner. I hate to use acronyms just in case. So we ourselves are a little unclear as to exactly, but we have produced a document again that should be circulated by the end of today, to try and provide some additional guidance. I'm pretty sure, having looked through the questions just shortly before this, that the majority of those questions will have been answered through that. I don't know if Vaughan just wants to run through any of the key ones with me, that just to check that we have had them answered.
Just a bit of clarity around the application. For those that applied and went in last week, they should already have got emails and letters back. Is that right?
Yeah, so because we didn't have the application process live, and obviously it technically shouldn't really be live now, what we did was we worked really helpfully through Gareth at CityCo to people approached us with proposals, obviously, and that's what we said to do through these previous Zoom meetings. So some of them, they're not even applications, they're just the proposals that were put forward. We've worked through those and responded to all the points of contact for those to either say yes, we're happy with this working in principle, or yes with modification, or unfortunately it's a no at this time, but let's look at what we can do instead. Those have gone out, yes, Vaughan, they went out on Friday evening. So everybody who had put in those proposals should have received them. I just don't want it to get confused with, if you have used our web form to apply for a formal temporary tables and chairs license, you will not have received anything other than an acknowledgement of receipt at the moment for that. And we can't start processing those until the legislation goes live, but we will start looking at them as a group of officers, and start looking at the viability of them, and have some early conversations with venues.
And just to make sure, because for those that then got turned down from that first tranche, there's still a willingness, though there's not a formal appeal process because it's not a formal process, there's still a willingness to look at actually how those could be resubmitted or reworked to make it work for you, for highways and so on.
Yes, or where we're really struggling with the location, there's definitely a willingness from the city, from the council, to look at what communal space we could potentially use to allow operators to maybe come and, use that space in some way. That has just obviously taken a bit of a backseat to us getting the first tranche of these proposals worked on for reopening on the 4th of July, but we're working on that as quickly as we can.
There's still room for more plans to come in.
Yeah.
And to work through that. Okay. If you haven't got anything on paper, is there, as it comes up in quite a few of the questions, is there anything to stop people just allowing people to drink outside and artificially putting up tables and chairs outside?
Well, it's not licensed, obviously. So where it hasn't been agreed in principle with us, we would advise against it, because there's lots of safety concerns and the major public safety risk. Obviously, nothing around pedestrian traffic will have been assessed or looked at or managed effectively. So if it hasn't been managed and agreed in principle through us, and it's presenting an obvious risk, then I think you're going to find that officers on the ground this weekend would be asking for that to be removed. And it's really difficult, obviously, and officers, both council officers and GMP, I'm sure they'll speak later, but we want to take as pragmatic an approach on the ground as we can with this, and assess the situation and have a look at what risks it's presenting, and be as flexible as we can be. But obviously the public health risk will override everything, and if it can't, that's why we're asking people to work with us in this more formalised, managed way. And we know that means that not everywhere has had some provision provided for Saturday, and unfortunately that's just the way it is. There is only so much we can do so quickly, but yeah, it's not technically been approved in principle by us, so we'd ask that didn't happen.
Thank you, Danielle. Anything extra from you, Fraser, on that?
No, I think Danielle's covered it all. I mean, obviously, like Danielle said, we've tried to find alternatives, and when we responded to all the people who submitted the proposals, we did go back with a couple of ideas in respect of others. There are some which are still ongoing, which are probably a bit more complex than others. So yeah, we're continuing to work on those as well.
Carmel, from an environmental health's point of view, how are you going to be managing the situation, and what are you looking for from businesses?
Hi, okay, so in environmental health, we're essentially looking at the health and safety in the workplace and the duties that they have on their staff, the business have on the staff, and on the public as well. So we also have got a letter to send out explaining how they need to formulate a risk assessment and make sure that they have the right controls in place as we go forward, especially on social distancing and keeping the areas clean and manageable, reducing queues, etc. So we've done a template. We've done this for the retail sector as well, which is rolled out, and this is the next phase. So we've got a standard template which is empty, and we've put together on government guidelines and through the hospitality sector some control measures, which will probably, there's a lot of control measures there, so it's not one list fits all. People will be able to cut and paste different control measures from it, whether they're a pub, whether they're a restaurant, whether they're bistro type places, and then they will basically explain what their actions are and how they will ensure that the controls are put in place. It's a really simple, the simplest way we could think of doing it for different sectors, to make it easy and workable for them to communicate to the staff and also to their customers. That will go on to the website hopefully tonight, if not tomorrow as well, because we've just been fine-tuning it. And we will be there to answer any questions that people have about their risk assessments as they progress them. And if they want further detailed advice and guidance, we do offer an on-site audit as well, to see what their operational procedures are, to see if they're on the right tracks further down the line. But that would be a very small fee that we will be charging for that, plus Legionella sampling as well for opening up on the water systems as well. But that information is really comprehensive. The letter explains what they should be doing. It explains how they need to be feeding into the contact tracing system, which the government is that's why they want people to collect data. The data is only so that we can help to reduce any clusters or outbreaks, and the information will be kept for 21 days. So this is explained in the letter and the reasons for that. But it's pretty comprehensive. We're there if anybody has any further questions or guidance. And in the first instance, I think, as Danielle said, the out of hours will take up any issues or concerns, and if there seem to be ongoing issues or breaches which we are not controlled at that stage, it will be referred on to us, and we can take it up with the duty of cares in the workplace. So hopefully we'll tie in there.
Quickly mute Carmel as a phone call comes in there. Thank you very much. So what the summary is, there is going to be a lot more detail coming out. We're currently recording Wednesday late afternoon. There's going to be a lot more detail out either tonight or Thursday morning, which people can work their way through from both sides. I know you mentioned, Danielle, license conditions, so we'll be working through those because we've got obviously a lot of questions around whether there's going to be a curfew, whether there's going to be effects on glass, what people are actually allowed to do outside, and so on and so on. That presumably will all be covered in the guidance.
Yeah, what we're working towards is midnight at the latest for any outside seating, and glass only if authorised by a council officer in writing, but otherwise it will be default as is now, plastics outside. I think they're the main, they're the sort of frequently asked questions about what those will be. Clearly, as you'd expect, all the furniture to be removed from the highway by the end of trading, and stored appropriately, that kind of thing. But as I said, that will be circulated by the end of today, because we just finalised that this afternoon.
That does mean, because I think it's come up in some of the early conversations, where you've got a group of businesses together using public realm, you need one of them or a lead person to be taking some responsibility for actually making sure that stuff is clear and stuff is put out in the right way and in the agreed way.
Yeah, and I think just one of the other key messages we probably want to get out on this is, you know, the city have been very keen to support the sector, hence, you know, doing this ahead of the legislation. So there's 2 points on that. Anything, obviously, that is being allowed in principle through, you know, a managed process with ourselves, has to be subject to a formal application, and it does not mean that that application will actually get granted in the terms, you know, as applied for, or even that was working to in principle. And the onus, you know, there's a big onus on operators here to make this to work safely as well. Otherwise, clearly there may be a difference in approach from the city from the initial outset. If it starts to become that behaviour isn't being managed effectively and it starts to become too unsafe. And the other key point on that is obviously being mindful that our normal standard tables and chairs would obviously, and is 11 p.m. at the minute, and members have said that they're willing to go to midnight to support the trade, and there's a trade-off there with residents of the city, and we have to be mindful of that. So again, we need operators to work with us, be very mindful of the neighbours when they're putting these proposals in, if they can engage with their neighbours, and really, you know, as I'm sure most of our operators already do this, but it's just to reiterate the point really, be a good neighbour, be open and engaging with you know, your neighbouring residents or businesses or whatever it is, and just all work together. You know, if there is an issue that maybe wasn't thought of and someone says actually having that furniture there is a bit of an issue for me or whatever it is, then, you know, let's just try and work and compromise and mitigate those issues in some way. And that's the approach that the officers on the ground will be taking, engaging with premises in the first instance. Actually, look, this is a bit of an issue. Can we change it in some way, mitigate that risk? And it really is only premises operators that are flagrantly flouting these regulations and showing any kind of disregard that will be coming down in a, you know, strongly on, because we just can't have it from a public safety point of view. But where operators are clearly trying the best here and working with it, we want to work with them, and we're interpreting a lot of the guidance as we go along as well. So it is very much it needs to be a partnership, and that's the approach we want to take.
That's really useful to know. Obviously, one of the things that's come up a lot through all the meetings is who's going to be responsible for enforcing social distancing, and how can that be done. And, you know, if somebody refuses to do social distancing, well, they immediately lose their license and get closed down. But it's going to be a sort of iterative process in discussion with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, what you'll see from the additional guidance that we're on top of the letter and the checklist that's already gone out is, you know, we're sort of suggesting to people that clearly through your risk assessment you'll be working out what the capacity inside the premises and any outside space that you do have should be, and we're suggesting, you know, that should be clearly documented, say at the entrance to a venue, and managed in some way, either that be a member of staff or security door staff if you've got it, one in, one out, that kind of stuff, just as we've seen a lot of the other sectors doing. And if you're clearly managing it in that way, and the capacity is managed in that way, I think if patrons then, you know, are technically at some points not keeping to the 1 metre plus rule, there is only so much a venue can be held to account for their patron behaviour. The key is clearly to try your best to manage it, to give the clear guidance to your patrons, and not allow big crowds of people, and obviously where it's getting out of hand, and to seek to manage that and address those issues. And clearly the ask will be to refuse entry or ask people to leave if they are flagrantly disregarding the COVID guidelines. But this isn't about being very, very technical and with operators if it's, you know, observed that some of their patrons are technically not, you know, 1 metre plus 2 metres apart. So we'll be looking at the whole operation, the way it's managed, the way the capacity is managed, and what the operator is actually trying to do to abide by the guidelines.
Yep. Carmel. Sorry, you need to unmute.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Yep.
Yeah, it's just to reiterate the risk assessment will guide them down the lines of they shouldn't really be queuing, they shouldn't really be just turning up, they should be booking in as much as they can do because of the capacity that they're going to be having for people coming to visit. So they should really be looking at their websites, looking at putting advice information out there, respecting their staff, respecting each other, respecting social distancing, making sure that no one's self-isolating and coming out to these venues, making sure that they know that they will be paying on a maybe cash free, and really it could all be designed out a lot by that communication very early on the website, so that people can check in and arrange their night out and have a great time by doing it in a controlled way. It's a new model, it's a mindset, and there's going to be teething problems, but I think that's the way that all the businesses, whether it's just wet pubs or pub bars, restaurants, are going to have to start thinking. It's about pre-arranged nights out. Thank you.
On the gathering of information that people have got to do, my understanding is that they've got to take the details of everybody that's coming into the establishment. Is that correct? I'm asking.
Sorry, was that for me?
Yes, hopefully.
Sorry, my volume went completely off then.
Sorry, yeah, for gathering of information that people have got to do of customers, they've got to do that for everybody. It's not just for the lead person in a party.
Well, you see, there is no strict guidelines on everybody, and I think this is a worry for businesses. They think they have to collate lots of information, and they're worried about GDPR. The reason for the information is for contact tracing details and to tie in with NHS requirements, so that we can check out if there's any clusters and outbreaks. But it also ties in with their own social distancing risk assessments. So it could be one person's details that they have, but they've got a group of 6 or so people. It's just knowing how many people will be there and booking those people in. It's not about getting every single I don't think it's about getting every single person's details. It's about knowing how to trace back, should we need to, for 21 days.
So as long as whoever gives their name can remember who was with them on that particular night, that's what's going to be the important thing.
Yeah, and the only way I guess they would be contacted if there was an issue would, yeah, I mean, they're all trained, very, very well trained, and tracers, and they've been through mountains of training on how to reassure people about confidentiality and how it's important just to touch base with them, just to get those in, just to see if there's been any symptoms. And that's what it's all about, really. And it's not about following up on, you know, dodgy things, people going having affairs or whatever. You know, no one's bothered about people's personal lives. It's about just getting the information on tracking the transmission of the virus.
Thank you very much. Final one, because again it came up quite a few times, is just a little bit of clarity on whether any entertainment is allowed at all. People have said, well, if we have an acoustic musician sitting in the corner, is that okay? If we have a DJ playing relatively lightly, is that okay? What are you guys looking for in terms of that?
Can I just...
a licensing thing, isn't it? Danielle?
I can come in.
Oh, sorry, Fraser, go on.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the guidance, I mean, it basically says, I'll read it out. It says, at this time, venues should not permit live performances, including drama, comedy and music, to take place in front of a live audience. So we're taking that as read. So, you know, there's been sort of queries raised by different operators, particularly strip clubs, for example, and, you know, our position is that, no, there should be no live performances, and, you know, equally that will apply to live performances of music or drama, like it says in the guidance.
Carmel, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just two things there. Again, in the guidance for the risk assessments, music really is expected to be kept at a low volume so that it doesn't raise people's voices into shouting, into transmitting viruses through extra vocal, you know, issues like that. But also, so music would be allowed but at a low level, which I don't imagine is what they would probably want to be doing if they wanted to have music and DJs. Strip clubs would be classed anyway as a close contact, in fact, which the question did say is a close contact service, which is again restricted anyway. Even if performances were allowed, they wouldn't be allowed because of the close contact activity, and there's no date for that yet, for reopening.
Excellent. So, the summary, if somebody waves if I get this wrong, we'll be putting this out Thursday morning for people, along with a video for GMP and hopefully one for TFGM as well, to just summarise what the situation is on transport and on the policing situation. By that time, hopefully, we'll be able to link into guidance around licensing conditions, around risk assessment, and all the other information that you talked about at that time. So we should be all in one place from our side, as well as all the other ways of getting to all that information. Are there any final words from any of you?
I'll just come in, Vaughan. Just to make the point, obviously it's the first weekend of reopening, and I just go back to when it was announced about hospitality reopening, and the message was, clearly one of caution, and yeah, we want all the businesses to reopen and to get back trading. And I was on a pub watch yesterday with licensees in Gorton, and that was really interesting, seeing the approach they're taking. And, one of them made the point of look, this weekend we're just looking as to work out how we can get back to some style of operation and do so safely. And I suppose, it's all new. It's all new for everyone, especially you as operators. You're going through the COVID secure risk assessment. You've got to work through that to make sure your customers are safe, to make sure your staff are safe, just make sure that they're on board. If you've got security, again, that you've worked through with them, your policies and procedures are going to work. And just be mindful, that hopefully there's a long road ahead. And so, just, I suppose, walk before you can run, but let's just make sure we can operate safely.
Thank you. I think the key is we don't all have the answers at the moment. Probably don't have many of the answers at the moment, but we're going to have to work them out over the next few weeks. Thank you all for joining us. I'm sure we'll do one of these again in a couple of weeks' time as we get more information coming through. Thank you in the meantime.